If it were up to me, I'd hand pink slips to like 95% of the federal government. Unfortunately, I'm not in charge, and that's not how it works. But there is something very similar Americans have at their disposal. The progressive movement, honestly, and a bunch of Republicans are absolutely terrified of. It's a mechanism around federal red tape, around the deep state and the perpetual bureaucracy and all that garbage down in D.C. And that's a convention of the states. Now, our founding fathers kind of predicted the situation we're in today. A government drunk with power, forcefully involved in nearly every aspect of our lives, and what they can't get passed by legislature, parties do by executive fiat. It happens on both sides of the aisle. We're seeing this with the federal mandate for, electric vehicles, minimum wage requirements. They want to take your gas stoves, too. Hell, COVID was about the clearest example of government overreach. All done by executive authority, no constitutional merits, massive power grabs, most of which they got wrong, by the way, and a lot of it the courts overturned once it reached them. But they did it anyway. Politicians on both sides of the aisle, much more Democrats than Republicans, they circumvent the Constitution. But there's an article in there specifically written to ensure that we, the people, have a mechanism to reclaim our governance. It's fantastic. Under Article 5 of the United States Constitution, quote, Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to the Constitution, or on the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of several states shall call a convention for proposing amendments. Why haven't we heard about this? Well, because this process can actually circumvent federal power. And the mainstream media, we know they're in the tank for big government, so why would they report on this? But with 2/3 of the states, it's 34, we can impose our desired amendments on the federal government. They can't say anything about it. Balanced budget, term limits, even disbanding entire swaths of the federal government. Think about this. Congress has a 13% approval rating right now. That bar is literally on the floor. How hard would it be to get 2/3 of the states to convene to limit their tenure? Probably pretty easy. But you think any congressman would be happy about that or even vote for it if it came in front of their desk? Of course not. But in this convention, there isn't a damn thing the D.C. swamp creatures can do about it. The Convention of States literally exists for this reason, empowering us with the rights given to all of us. But as in the case with anything government-related, there's a process with it. So before I get into the Convention of States and how it works, I want to explain the concept under which America was designed. It's the concept of federalism. A centralized government with constitutional limitations, leaving everything else to fall onto the states, or to a decentralized local government. This is all noted in the 10th Amendment. I'm sure every one of you have read this. Quote, the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution nor prohibited to it by the states are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. That means the Constitution has specific things the federal government can do and cannot do. Specific limitations, and anything not specifically noted is up to the states to legislate. Now, we all know that the creeping gradualism of government has completely overreached. I mean, totally. And the founding fathers understood this. And lawsuits are prohibitively expensive, folks, so it's hard to charge that way. But by the time these things do reach the courts to be overturned, the damage is likely all already done. The founding fathers wanted to make sure we had a mechanism to challenge this. And that's what this process is for. It's a backstop for America. So, how does it work? Well, as I said, you need 2/3 of the states, you need 34 of them, to first call a convention by passing an identical resolution to a major issue facing the country. This could be anything. Like I said, this would be more expeditious on a universal issue like term limits or a balanced budget. But this is by far the hardest step because people have to buy into it. And since there's such opposition between the parties, it's a pretty high bar. So the issues must be chosen carefully. Now, Republicans only control, I think, 55% of state legislatures nationwide. So you're going to need some Democrats to buy on board, but that's not an impossible task. There's a lot of issues that we can agree on. I think federal tenure is probably one of them. So once you have the 34 states on board, a convention would be called for the purposes of proposing amendments. All 50 states would then send a delegate who would advocate for their state's interest. Each would get one vote towards any proposed constitutional amendment. Now, a simple majority of those 50 delegates would then have to vote in favor of whatever amendment is on the floor in order to send it back to each state's legislature for ratification. Look, if you're not tracking totally on this, the magnitude of this is huge. I mean, it's mega. But we're talking about reining in the federal government. It's not supposed to be easy. It's essentially a legislative civil war. Committees would form based on suggestions and proposed amendments, would be debated on the House floor of the convention in the eye of the open public, which we don't always see from the backdoor deals and earmarks in Congress.
But we have to pass the bill so that you can find out what is in it.
Remember that? That's why this process is transparent. So let's say the 26 states' representatives agree on an amendment, whatever it may be. It would then head back to the state legislatures for ratification, where it would require a 75% approval before becoming law. Again, on a universal issue that is negatively affecting everyone from Wall Street to Main Street. This is not impossible, folks. It's actually very reasonable. The values of most of America and their representatives are pretty different. And if this were to happen, Congress would have no say. That's my favorite part about this. Thanks to Article 5, Congress can't block amendments favorable to the states, regardless of where they stand politically. Congress is also constitutionally obligated to call for a convention after receiving the requisite number of state requests and would have no power to deliberate on whether to call an Article 5 convention once it's received the requisite number of applications. So, how many times in your life, folks, have you felt that Congress has given you the middle finger? And do 2/3 of normal Americans feel the same way? I'd venture to say probably yes. Article 5 is giving it right back to Congress, a founding principle to make sure they in D.C. know that they work for us. So why aren't we doing this? Well, there actually is a group that is literally doing this. They have recruited 19 states, all of which have passed the Convention of States application since 2014. And calls for reform are growing louder by the day. What does that say about the state of our country, folks? People are seeing the value this can bring. So if you're tired of Capitol Hill giving you the finger, this is the way to give it back. Now, since launching a decade ago, the Convention of States has blossomed from this fantasy possibility that people laughed at. It now has millions of supporters across the nation, and states are starting to wake up and sign on in droves.